What if the Civil War didn't really end in 1865? What if the most important battle for America's future wasn't fought with guns and cannons, but with laws, ballots, and the meaning of freedom itself? In the 12 years after the Civil War, the United States faced a question more dangerous than secession. Could a nation built on slavery truly become a democracy for all? This was the Reconstruction Era, a time of extraordinary hope, fierce resistance, and choices that would shape American life for the next 100 years. Today, we're uncovering how close America came to real equality, and why that promise was ultimately abandoned. This was the 12-year period right after the Civil War, from 1865 to 1877, when the United States had to answer some monumental questions. How would the nation heal its wounds? How would the defeated Southern states be brought back into the Union? And most importantly, what would be the fate of nearly 4 million newly freed African Americans? Let's set the stage. The year is 1865. The Civil War has just ended. The nation is scarred, and the South is in ruins. President Abraham Lincoln, who had envisioned a lenient path to reunification, has been assassinated. His successor, Andrew Johnson, a Southerner himself, takes over. Johnson's plan for Reconstruction was quick and forgiving. He wanted to pardon most former Confederates and allow Southern states to rejoin the Union as soon as they ratified the 13th Amendment, which officially abolished slavery. Sounds simple, right? Well, it wasn't. Many in the North, particularly a group in Congress known as the Radical Republicans, were furious. They believed Johnson's plan was far too soft on the former rebels and, crucially, did almost nothing to protect the rights of the newly freed slaves. Under Johnson's watch, Southern states quickly passed black codes. These were restrictive laws designed to control and exploit African Americans, essentially trying to recreate the conditions of slavery. Black people were forbidden from owning certain property, carrying weapons, and even from being out after dark. Unemployed African Americans could be arrested and forced to work for white landowners. It was a clear attempt to maintain the old social order. The radical Republicans in Congress were not having it. Led by figures like Thaddeus Stevens and Charles Sumner, they fought back. They passed the Civil Rights Act of 1866 and, more importantly, drafted the 14th Amendment. This was a game changer. The 14th Amendment granted citizenship to all persons born or naturalized in the United States, including former slaves, and guaranteed all citizens equal protection of the laws. It was a direct challenge to the Black Codes and the Supreme Court's earlier Dred Scott decision, which had denied citizenship to African Americans. Congress then took control of Reconstruction, passing the Reconstruction Acts of 1867. These acts divided the South into 5 military districts, each governed by a Union general. To be readmitted to the Union, Southern states had to draft new constitutions that guaranteed voting rights for all men, regardless of race, and they had to ratify the 14th Amendment. This period is often called Radical Reconstruction, and it ushered in a revolutionary, though brief, era of political change. For the first time in American history, African American men could vote and hold political office. This was an unprecedented shift. With the protection of federal troops, about 2,000 African American men were elected to local, state, and even national positions. 16 served in the U.S. Congress. Hiram Revels and Blanche K. Bruce, both from Mississippi, became the first African American senators. These newly formed biracial governments in the South started ambitious projects. They established public school systems for both black and white children, rebuilt infrastructure like roads and bridges, and tried to create more equitable tax laws. Life for freed people was transforming in other ways too. Freedom meant the ability to control their own lives. Families that had been torn apart by slavery desperately searched for loved ones. Churches, which had been the heart of the community during slavery, became even more important, serving as schools, social centers, and political hubs. The desire for education was immense. With the help of the Freedmen's Bureau, a federal agency created to assist former slaves, and northern missionary groups, schools sprouted up across the South. Institutions that would become today's historically black colleges and universities, like Howard and Fisk, were founded during this time. Economically, however, true independence was much harder to achieve. Most freed people had only the clothes on their backs. The dream of 40 acres and a mule, a promise of land redistribution that was discussed but never fully implemented, just that, a dream. Without land of their own, most African Americans were forced into a system called sharecropping. In theory, a landowner would provide a family with a plot of land, seeds, and tools in exchange for a share of the crop. But in practice, high interest rates and dishonest landlords often trapped sharecroppers in a cycle of debt, leaving them little better off than they were under slavery. It was a system that ensured a cheap labor force for the cotton fields and perpetuated economic dependency. Meanwhile, the push for equality was met with a violent and brutal backlash. White supremacist groups, most notoriously the Ku Klux Klan, emerged across the South. Using terror, intimidation, and outright murder, they targeted African Americans and their white Republican allies. Their goal was to overthrow the new Reconstruction governments and restore white supremacy. They burned schools, attacked voters, and assassinated political leaders. The violence was widespread and horrific. In response, Congress passed the Enforcement Acts in 1870 and 1871, also known as the Ku Klux Klan Acts. These laws made it a federal crime to interfere with a citizen's right to vote and gave the president the power to use federal troops to suppress the Klan. President Ulysses S. Grant used these powers effectively for a time, and the Klan was largely dismantled, at least for a while. So why did Reconstruction end? By the mid-1870s, the political will in the North was fading. The nation was tired of the ongoing conflict in the South. Economic problems, like the Panic of 1873 and a series of political scandals, distracted the federal government. The radical Republican leaders were dying out, and a new generation of politicians was less committed to the cause of racial equality. White Southern Democrats, calling themselves redeemers, gradually regained control of state governments, often through violence and voter fraud. The final nail in the coffin came with the disputed presidential election of 1876. The results were so close that they were contested in 4 states. To resolve the crisis, a backroom deal was made, known as the Compromise of 1877. Republican Rutherford B. Hayes was given the presidency, and in return, he agreed to withdraw the last remaining federal troops from the South. With the army gone, the last of the Republican governments in the South collapsed. Reconstruction was over. The end of Reconstruction was a devastating blow to the cause of civil rights. In the decades that followed, Southern states implemented Jim Crow laws, which enforced strict racial segregation. They used poll taxes, literacy tests, and grandfather clauses to disenfranchise African American voters. The Supreme Court's 1896 decision in Plessy v. Ferguson upheld the doctrine of separate but equal, giving a legal basis to segregation for the next 60 years. So, was Reconstruction a failure? It's a complex question. If the goal was to create a racially just and equal society, then it was a tragic failure. The promises of the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments would go unfulfilled for nearly a century. But it wasn't a total failure. Reconstruction was a bold experiment in interracial democracy. For a brief moment, it showed what was possible. The constitutional amendments passed during this era provided the legal foundation for the civil rights movement of the 20th century. Martin Luther King Jr. and other leaders would point to the 14th and 15th Amendments to demand the rights that had been promised 100 years earlier. The Reconstruction Era is a story of incredible progress and heartbreaking retreat. It reminds us that freedom is not just given. It must be constantly fought for and defended. It is a crucial chapter in the ongoing struggle for America to live up to its founding ideals. What are your thoughts on the legacy of Reconstruction? Let me know down in the comments. Thanks so much for watching, and if you found this video informative, please hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into history.